Hi, my name is Sophie and welcome back to my channel. So during Vlogmas I posted a video where I showed you the inside of my reading journal, my book journal for this year. This is essentially a bullet journal that I have designed myself to be the perfect book journal for me. It's not the perfect book journal for everyone, but it's exactly what I want from my book journal. And when I made that video, there was a couple of spreads I hadn't made that I intended to put in the back of the journal, mostly because I think with the things at the front you have a limited amount of space. Like when I allot one page to something and then put something else on the next page, there's no room for that to grow, whereas the things I put at the back are things that I think I need room to grow, if that makes any sense at all. So there are two categories here that I didn't speak about in this video, in that video. So I thought I'd show you them today and go through my series tracker, because I went through, I have an app where I've scanned every single book I own in my library on my phone, and I went through and made a note of every book that is part of a series that I like definitely know as part of a series. There's some romance books that I think are part of interconnected, like standalones, but I'll add them as and when I get to them. This is what I've got so far. So the first spread I had, I'm just going to hold it up like this because I think it'd be easier, is an adaptation spread. So when I've read a book that I know has a TV or film adaptation, I'm going to make a note of it here, and then when I've got a spare minute, or a spare minute as if these take a minute to watch, when I find myself with nothing to watch, I can turn to one of these because I've read the book, so I can justify watching them. And what I've got on this list so far is 5 Feet Apart, Alex Rider, Good Omens, Ready Player One, Me Before You, and My Policeman. And then on this other page we have my series tracker. I don't know how well you'll be able to see it because there's quite a lot to be able to see, but I've got what I've called unfinished series, and by that I mean the rest of the series hasn't been released yet. So they're not unfinished in that they're never going to be continued, but it's things like the Empyrean that started with Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, obviously has more books to come but they've not come out yet. The Legendborn cycle that started with Legendborn and then Bloodmarked, Oathbound is due to come out January next year, and God knows whether that will be the end of Legendborn cycle or whether it will be a longer series. And then I've also written down Eve of Man because I was obsessed with Eve of Man by Giovanna and Tom Fletcher, and I pre-ordered the Evolution when it came out and I was so obsessed with it. And I'm pretty sure book 3 was due to come out in 2020, 2021, and it seems like they've just forgotten about it. But I live in hope that maybe one day we'll get the conclusion to that trilogy. It was so good, so good. Let's just start at the beginning. Most of this page is full of series I've started, and then as we get to later pages, here's an example. There's lots of books that I haven't read any of the series of. I'm just going to talk through all of the series that I own and how many of them I've read. So the first book on my list is the Cruel Prince trilogy by Holly Black, and I have read book 1. I read that as an audiobook late last year. My sibling gifted me a copy of the Cruel Prince that I have within reaching distance, but the cheapest and most efficient way for me to buy the sequels was to buy the box set from the works. That is not in reaching distance. So I do now have a spare copy of the Cruel Prince, so there's that. But I do own both of the sequels and I haven't read them yet. Next on my list is the Mayfall Hills series of interconnected standalones by Hannah Grace. The first 2 books in the series are Icebreaker and Wildfire, which I rated Icebreaker 4 stars, I rated Wildfire 5 stars, I absolutely adored it. And book 3 in the series is following Henry, which is another member of the hockey team, and I did pre-order that. Oh, I can colour that in. How exciting. I think making this list made me realise that I hadn't pre-ordered it, and I definitely wanted to because I loved Wildfire so much. I definitely needed to have, I think it's called Daydream, book 3, on my list. So that is ready and waiting to be ticked when that comes out later this year. And then, as I already mentioned, the Hades and Persephone series by Scarlett St. Clair. I've explained this before. I've kept this graphic in my downloads folder on my laptop because I feel like I have to explain this series every time I mention it. But it's essentially 2 accompanying trilogies that are meant to be read side by side. So you're meant to read book 1 of Persephone, then book 1 of Hades, and then book 2 and book 2 and book 3 and book 3, etc. Except I didn't do that. So I've read the whole Persephone side. I've read book 1 of Hades, but I haven't read book 2 or 3. But book 4 or book 7, depending on how you're counting it, comes out in, I want to say, March. So I do have that pre-ordered. There was a special edition at Waterstones that was cheaper than the standard edition, so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to pre-order that one then, aren't I? Next on my list is the Killing Eve series that starts with Codename Villain L by Luke Jennings. I got the first book in this series as part of my wedding library. When we got married in 2022, my husband and I, instead of having a gift registry, we asked our guests to gift us a copy of their favourite book, and in an endeavour to read them all, we take it in turns to choose one a month. I read it and he doesn't. I call it a book club. So I read the first book in the series as part of my book club, and I really enjoyed it, and I do want to read the other two, but I currently don't own them, so they are on my list of to buy at some point. Rather than doing a book buying ban this year, I've made myself a little book reward chart. I have it within reaching distance. It's really basic and my printer was running out of ink, but I've just listed like 1 to 10 down this side, and then when I've read 10 books I'm allowed to buy a new one, so then I can write or print off a picture or something in here of the book that I choose when I've read 10 books. And as you can see, I've read 2 books so far this year, and I've got room for 3 whole rewards on this chart. Maybe the Killing Eve series is something I will buy as a reward to myself at some point later this year. That's the other thing about having the series tracker, is I can see where the gaps are in my library and fill some of those in. So where I've read the first Killing Eve book and I know that I like it, I can justify buying the sequels more than some of these other series where I've bought book 1 but I don't own the rest, but I haven't read book 1, so it's not really, it doesn't make sense. Next on my list is a series called Icons. I believe it's a duology by Margaret Stoll. I've not seen anyone talking about this. It's like a YA sci-fi fantasy kids with superpowers kind of book, and I really enjoyed it. I read it because I pulled it out of my TBR jar last year, so it was a really kind of spontaneous read, and it was really good. And there's a sequel called Idols, which I don't have, so that's another one that I might buy using my reward scheme at some point later this year. Then we've got the Atlas trilogy by Olivia Blake. I did actually treat myself to the Waterstones edition of the Atlas complex, because look at the sprayed edges. The thing is, I should have resisted this because I didn't enjoy the Atlas 6 and I didn't enjoy the Atlas Paradox, but because I've read those two, I feel obliged to read this. So now I have it. And I had a £10 off voucher, and my mum was visiting and she offered to buy me a book, so it doesn't count as part of the book buying ban reward scheme thing. Then arguably one of the longest series I own is the Alex Rider series by Anthony Horowitz, which is currently a 14 book series, and I have read books 1 to 13. I own book 14 but I haven't read it yet, and I believe it's still ongoing. It's a middle grade spy series that I started reading because I owned the books from when I was the appropriate age to read them, and I pulled the title out of my TBR jar, and I hadn't really planned for my TBR jar to how I was going to approach series, because I didn't want to put each book of the series in the jar individually, because then I would potentially pick them out in the wrong order. And then I was like, well, do I now have to read the whole thing in one go? And I did, because I'm super paranoid about forgetting details anyway. So with a lot of these series, I feel like with the Atlas series, I feel like I have to reread the Atlas 6 and the Atlas Paradox before I read the Atlas Complex. But I think Alex Rider is one that I can pick up on without having to reread 13 books. The next series on my list is the Shattered Sea series by Joe Abercrombie, and this is one of those series where I accidentally bought a sequel and I need to buy the first books in the series. So I bought Half a War, which is book 3 in the series, and the first 2 books, which I can't remember the names off the top of my head, I'll put in pictures, are almost always in any Waterstones I visit. So that is definitely a set of books that I'm going to be buying with my reward scheme at some point this year. But here's another loop in the system that I need to decide whether morally I can justify. If I buy book 1, I will then own book 1 and book 3, so I might as well buy book 1 and 2 at the same time, but then is that screwing the reward scheme to read 10 books, and rather than having a 1-book reward I have a 2-book reward, but they're from the same series, and I still wouldn't be able to read the book that I already own if I only read book 1, or only buy book 1. So realistically I'm going to buy 2 books instead of 1 at some point this year. Then I've realised I've put Maple Hills on this list twice, but I'm just going to cross that one out. I know some people get super paranoid with their journals and they're like, oh my god, it always has to look pretty. And I'm like, if you get too worried about it looking pretty, then you will never actually use the journal. So I've just scribbled that out. That's fine. Then I've got Leigh Bardugo's series, Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows. I own the first Shadow and Bone book and not the 2 sequels, and I own both books in the Six of Crows duology. Then I have the Ben Garston series by James Bennett. This is another one where I bought book 2 accidentally, not realising it was book 2, but then I put book 1 on my Christmas list and my beloved mother bought me book 1 for Christmas. So I now have book 1 and book 2. There is a book 3 that I don't own, but that's one that I can justify not buying until I've read the others, because at least I can now read the book that I already owned. I hope this makes sense. Then I think we're entirely into the books that I haven't started any of, but I own plenty of. So I've got the entire Modern Fairy Tales by Holly Black, which is a trilogy I picked up in the works. I've got 2 duologies by Alexandra Christo, which were in a box set at the works, and I was like, they look alright, and they were like 12 quid, so I picked them up on a whim. I have the entire Mortal Instruments series by Cassandra Clare. It's not quite in shop, but it is on this shelf over here. And I've also made a note of the other associated series that come with the Mortal Instruments, though that whole series baffles me, because there are so many now. There's so many series that are all interconnected in some way, and they're meant to be read in a certain order. I just don't know what that order is. So if anyone understands how Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare works, please do let me know. And then I want to do a reread of The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, and I want to read the prequel book, but I haven't read that yet. I own the Maze Runner series by James Dashner. Again, I have read book 1, but it was so long ago that I would want to read it before reading the other 3 books that I own. I believe there are more books in that series now, but I will consider buying them as and when I finish the ones I've already got. Then I've got book 1 and 2 of The Luminaries by Susan Dennard. I don't know if, there we go. I don't know if there are more books in this series, but I did want to shout out, my sibling bought me the sequel, The Hunting Moon, for Christmas, and these sprayed edges are some of the most beautiful sprayed edges I own. And they're on a paperback. Most of the sprayed edges I own are on hardbacks, but this is stunning, and I'm obsessed with it. Then the series, I think they're interconnected standalones in a series called The Marriage Game by Sarah Desai, and it was when I was making this list that I realised that book 1 in the series is the one I don't own, and it's one of those that, even though they're interconnected standalones, in all of the interconnected standalones I've read before, it is more enjoyable if you read them in order. So as and when I get to a point where I'm ready to read that series, I will probably buy book 1. Or again, I can use my reward scheme to buy it. The Hank Green series, apparently according to Storygraph it's called The Carls. I've never heard it called that before, but what's it? An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing and A Beautifully Foolish Endeavour, both by Hank Green. I haven't read either of those, and I do own them. Another Anthony Horowitz series, The Power of Five. Bought that in a box set at the works. Haven't read it. This is a really old series that I read when I was a kid, and I want to reread for the nostalgia, and I'm going to get it to annotate my point. These books are called, oh, you can't even see them, they're called The Ballet School, and it's just about a girl who goes to like a boarding ballet school, and the adventures she gets up to while she's there. They're really short, they're kids books, so I would like to reread those, and I think some of them are on Kindle Unlimited. So that's the Ballet School series by Mal Lewis Jones, if anyone's interested. Then a series that I very sensibly have bought book 1 and not the rest of the series, because I'm going to do this properly, but it's Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, which I've heard incredible things about, and I have a feeling that once I read it I am going to want to binge read the further 3 books in the series. Then I own the entire series called The Divide by Elizabeth Kay. Again, this is a series I've not seen anyone talking about. I'll put pictures on screen, but I definitely read at least one of them at some point, but I don't remember anything about them, so I want to reread them. Then I do own the first book in the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy, which I've heard amazing things about, but again, I'm trying to do it in the right order, where I bought one, I'll read that, and then I'll buy the rest if I like them. Then is another series from my childhood. I'm going to have to get it from the shelves. The series of books by an author called Dick King-Smith, who I believe is a prolific children's author in the UK, or at least was. I think a lot of his books are quite old, so not sure if he's still around, but he wrote a series of books about a character called Sophie. So shock horror, my mum bought these for me when I was a child, and I want to reread these at some point. We've got a massive series, the Skullduggery Pleasant series by Derek Landy. I think I own books 1 to 5 physically. I own every book on my Kindle because I did a reread when I was doing my A-levels, and then my husband got into rereading them when he got a Kindle a couple of years ago. So between us we have the whole series, which I will read at some point, but again, it's another one that's ongoing. So there's a lot of books. There's at least, on my list, I've got 16 books. Then I've got every book in the Chronicles of Narnia series by C.S. Lewis. I did read a couple of these with my mum when I was a child, but I would like to reread them as an adult. I've heard they still stand the test of time. They are a classic fantasy series. Then for Christmas I got the entire ACOTAR series by Sarah J Maas. I already owned A Court of Thorns and Roses, so I do now have a dupe of that, but yeah, I've not read any of them. Will I get around to it this year? Maybe. The next series on my list is another Sarah J Maas one, because I have Crescent City. What's the first one called? House of Earth and Blood. It's on my 24 in 2024, so I'm 99% sure I'm going to get to it this year. But I know that book 2 is already out and book 3 is due out really soon. Then I've got the entire Shatter Me, well no, I haven't got the entire Shatter Me series. I've got the first 5 books in the Shatter Me series, and from my research there are 5 novellas and a 6th book. Then there's a series of books called The Medusa Project by Sophie Mackenzie, which I initially owned books 4 and 6, and I've since been finding other random books in the series in charity shops. So I think I picked up book 1, 2 and 3 in a charity shop, and I'm now, the only book I don't own now is book 5, so I definitely own enough of the series to read it and give it a chance, but I feel like I need book 5 before I start. Then I own the first 3 books in the Abhorsen series by Garth Nix. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but according to my research there's lots of novellas and additional books, but I do own the first 3 books, which will give me enough to figure out if I like it enough to buy the rest. Then I've got 4 out of 5 books in the Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. Maximum Ride by James Patterson is another series that I read when I was a teenager and I absolutely adored, and I owned the first 6 books in the series. But in doing the research to make this list, there are 5 additional books out now, and it was beginning to lose its plot a little bit by the time when I was reading it, so I don't know what 5 additional books are about, but I would like to reread them, mostly for the nostalgia. Then I own the first 2 books in the Chronicles of Ancient Darkness series by Michelle Paver, and in my research I found that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more books, but I own books 1 and 2, so if I like those I'll consider investing in the rest. This is getting a bit repetitive at this point. I've got all 3 books in the His Dark Materials series by Philip Pullman. I have this beautiful special edition set of the Bridgerton books that came from Illumicrate, but I don't know if I want to read them or if I might buy them on my Kindle. Then I've got all 5 books from the original Percy Jackson trilogy. I've got all 5 books from the original Percy Jackson series, plus the 6th book that came out recently. And again, this is another one where there are more spin-off series and I don't know what order I need to read them in. So there's the Heroes of Olympus, the Kane Chronicles, the Trials of Apollo and Magnus Chase, and I have no idea where they fit within the series. So if anyone knows Percy Jackson, please do let me know. Powerless by Lauren Roberts is on my 24 in 2024, and the next book in that series has recently been announced. I don't know if it's going to be a duology or if it's going to be a longer series. And Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I know Ruthless Vows came out at the beginning of this month. I've only just bought Divine Rivals and I haven't read it yet, so once I know that I like it, I can justify buying the sequel. I own Divergent by Veronica Roth, and I remember being really disappointed by the film, and generally that was another one of those books kind of in the Hunger Games Twilight era that was really popular and was let down by a crappy film adaptation. But I own book 1. If I like it, I'll buy the rest. Though I've heard a lot of people saying that they pretend that Allegiant doesn't happen, so maybe this is a series that I just don't need to read. Then I've written down Harry Potter because I would like to do a reread, but also I don't want to endorse the series, so maybe I will, maybe I won't. And then last, probably a weird one to close on, there's a series called The Cornish Village School, which I picked up one of the books, which is called Second Chances, which should have been enough to tell me that it was the second book in a series, but it didn't say anywhere on the book that it was the second book in a series. I picked it up in a random garden centre, and I've since been to other different garden centres and seen more books in this series, so it must be a garden centre exclusive, but I've never seen book 1. I thought I'd done the research properly and put book 1 on my Christmas list, but it turns out I put book 3 on my Christmas list. So now, out of a 5-book series, I own books 2 and 3. That's definitely going to be the first book I buy with my reward scheme, because the fact that my mother went out of her way to buy me book 3 for Christmas, not knowing it was book 3, I feel a bit guilty. Honestly, I'm kind of looking forward to reading it. Even though I've never heard anyone talking about it, I think it's going to be a really nice palette cleanser as and when I get through all the other series on this list. And that is why the series tracker has to go at the back of the book. I mean, it starts here and then it extends and it extends. And I have no doubt that it will continue to extend, though I really need to tick off some of these books, because my unread TBR is getting out of hand. But we're getting there, slowly but surely. So there is a very rambly video about all of the series I own and are on my series tracker that I haven't read yet. I hope this was a nice little insight into my library. I hope you've enjoyed watching this. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at the weekend for another weekly reading vlog. Bye!